This podcast contains descriptions of violence against children and adult language and is not suitable for all audiences. Listener discretion is advised. Hi, everyone, and welcome to Suffer the Little Children, the true crime podcast giving voices back to the victims of child abuse and shining a harsh spotlight on the parents, guardians, and caretakers who silence them. I'm your host, Laine, and this is episode 119, Giovanni Melton, Part 2. Last week, I told you the story of 14-year-old Giovanni Melton, who was shot to death by his father on November 2nd, 2017. Wendell Melton claimed the shooting was an accident, but many, including Giovanni's mother, believe the murder was perpetrated by a man who couldn't stand having a gay son. In this episode, you'll hear my conversation with Giovanni's mom, Veronica Melton, who has channeled her grief and anger at the senseless murder of her baby into advocating for other LGBTQ+ youth of color with the hope of preventing future such tragedies. This is part 2 of the heartbreaking story of Giovanni Melton. Because I'm recording this episode a week ahead, no patron shoutouts today. Again, I apologize for my voice, since I am just getting over a cold this week. Without further ado, please enjoy my conversation with a true warrior mama and one of the most inspiring people I've ever had the pleasure of speaking with. My guest on the podcast today is Veronica Melton, Giovanni's mother. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, and thank you for having me here today.
Absolutely. I'm excited to talk to you because you have done a lot of work to advocate for the LGBTQ youth community, and it's really impressive everything that you've accomplished in just 5 short years.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. It was pretty hard initially, so I knew that when the time came that I was going to have to be strong enough to tell my story, because I was going to have to tell my story over and over again. And although my son was killed in 2017, it wasn't until really the end of last year and this year that I was able to be strong enough to discuss it.
Yeah, that would be very difficult to rehash it all, especially since you were learning the details bit by bit as you went.
Exactly. So basically how our story started was that I met Giovanni's father in California. We used to work at United Airlines, and then we ended up getting married, and I moved out here to join him because he moved out here in Nevada first. But we originally met each other in California. It was not a great relationship. The first year was okay, but then after that, it just went downhill. There was issues with, domestic violence happening twice, and a lot of verbal abuse and a lot of controlling, to the point where I eventually had to leave, and get out of that abusive relationship. We officially divorced in 2004, and we had 2 boys. My first son was Marcelino. He is my oldest son. He'll be 24 this year. And then I had my second son. His name is Giovanni, and they were both from Wendell, both sons. And I left Giovanni's father when Giovanni was 6 months old. So he doesn't have a lot of recollection of his relationship with his father, although my oldest son did. 2000 is when he had hit me, and I decided to, of course, call the police, and I had them take all of his weapons away. He had about 20 weapons. He was ex-military in the Navy, and I wanted to make sure that he didn't have any weapons, in the home. So he later was convicted of domestic violence, and he had to go through anger management and wasn't allowed to own a weapon after that.
And yet he had 6 of them in his possession at the time of his arrest.
Exactly. 6 of them where he couldn't explain how he got the weapons to the police. He kept giving them different stories.
That sounds like something he's very good at, telling all these different stories.
Yes, yes, and unfortunately, the stories that he tells are so ridiculous because there are stories where you can obviously find out the truth very easily. So he's not a person to be able to tell the truth.
Was he like that the whole time you knew him?
He wasn't, and I don't know what point it changed, but we dated for about 1 year, and then after we dated and we got married, it's like everything changed. It was like a 180-degree turn. His personality changed. My family. When I told them about the abuse, they couldn't believe it because he made such a fake persona of being this wonderful, giving person. And then once I got married to him, he was a completely different person.
Wow, that sounds a lot like narcissistic abuse.
Oh, yes, you are absolutely right. It's hard because you always think that someone else is going to be the type of person that would go through that. And when you find yourself in that situation, it's almost like you're astonished because you're thinking, how did I get into this? How did this happen to me? And you think it has something to do with education, and it has nothing to do with it. It could happen to anyone.
Exactly. They find their victims. They're very good at finding their victims, and it can be naivety or age, those sorts of things. And so, of course, the boys grew up knowing that.
Right. And, after we divorced, my children were always with me, and I was very, very protective over my children. I never let them go to anyone's home and spend the night without me being there and knowing these people. So anything that was good for them, he would always talk bad about it to my children, kind of make them feel bad that they were doing good, or just be very selfish and sabotaging anything that was good for them, whether they were going, through church programs, or I had both of my boys in karate. They loved doing that and different activities. And he would try to also brainwash them and tell them that the Mormon church didn't like Black people, and why were they in the church, that they didn't like them, just really hurting them, anything that was good for them.
Yeah, and how confusing for them too, since they probably felt very welcome at church.
Exactly.
I'm sure now your older son is aware of what he was doing.
Yes, he knows what happened now, and it's really sad because my son, both of them, they idolized Wendell so much because, of course, if you have one parent that you never see, you idolize them, you want to spend time with them, especially a father figure. And I raised my boys pretty much, as a single mom most of their lives, and they just yearned for his attention, for his love. And he tried his best to not spend time with them because he would tell them that, well, I can't spend time with you because your mother's making me pay child support, so I can't see you. It's your mom's fault. And, crazy things like that to them. So they would feel bad about it because then they would feel that they were the cause of the reason why they couldn't see their father because, the mean, ugly wife was asking for child support to take care of them.
I'm sure that led to some resentment between them and you, which was not what you needed.
Exactly. And it was pretty much that type of relationship where he would say really bad things to me. He would try and brainwash the boys. And I think that because they were so young, they believed anything that he said. And it was very hurtful because I was trying to give them a structured home, making sure they ate at the exact time. They had their homework at the exact time. They took baths. Everything was structured. But yet when they would go over to their father's house, he would lie and say that they were with him, and half the time, he would drop them off with his mom in California. He would take off with his friends, and he never really spent quality time. So they never got the time and the love that they really wanted from their dad.
And how long did they visit him for? Was it a matter of days, or did he have them for weeks at a time?
No, he would never spend that kind of time with them. At the most, it would be a week. If he had like a vacation time, then he would spend a week with them. And then later on, I found out that the only reason why they spent a week is because his wife at the time would be out of the country back in Japan, and he would be able to spend some time with them. But that was happened very, very few times. Most of the time that they would spend with them is maybe just a weekend, and they would come back. But it was never for a long period of time.
So did they really not get along with their stepmother? Or
Well, what I was told by my son, my oldest son, Marcelino, was that she, initially would let them come over the house and visit. But then one day, apparently, she had spanked Giovanni, and Giovanni was maybe like 2 or 3 years old, over a game or something like that. And Marcelino ran to Wendell and told him that Miyuki had hit Giovanni. And then Wendell got into a big, huge argument with Miyuki. And then that's when she said, okay, fine, then they'll never come over here again. And apparently that's the reason why they were never allowed to come over her house when she was there.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. And it just, the way the media took certain things as fact that they just got from random people and ran with it.
Right, exactly. There's a lot of things that were on the internet that people were just went with it, like you said, not knowing the facts. And it's a shame because they built this image of myself being a person that just threw my children away and didn't care about them, or other situations that weren't true, but never went and asked to get the real information. They just went off whatever someone else would tell them.
Right. And that's awful. That's why I reached out to you. There was some things I just thought that can't be true. I don't see how it could, where they said you had abandoned them, but in the timeline I had built, there was nowhere that could have happened. And I just thought, you know what, we need to straighten this out.
Exactly.
And it's not fair that you haven't been able to tell, your actual story.
Right. And a lot of it has been because of the fact that of the ongoing murder case that's been going on. So basically what happened is, kind of summarize some of the information, was I was having trouble with my oldest son with Marcelino, and he had given me like a physical threat because he was so in love with this one girl and wanted to be able to go places with the young girl, and he was prohibited from receiving expensive gifts and stuff. So it got to the point where he threatened me, and I thought, you know what, I can't sleep with one eye open and one eye closed trying to raise, two boys. So I went to Wendell's home, and I went to drop off Marcelino, my oldest son. Well, that's when Giovanni jumped out of the car and ran around, and I was trying to catch him, and he wouldn't come to the car, and he wanted to stay with his brother. And I told him, that he had to stay in the car, but he wouldn't. And then he screamed at me and said, Mom, I don't want to be separated from my brother. So then that's when I made the decision to let them stay together, and I dropped them off over at Wendell's home. And then in December, Wendell had stated, well, you know what, why don't we just go ahead and make this legal? Let's just go ahead and let's go to court, and I'll go ahead and be the primary custodial parent, and you can have visitation. So in my head, I thought, this man has finally owned up to his responsibilities. The boys are going to be staying with him. So we went to court. He didn't want to accept any child support, which to me was like, I was like dumbfounded, because this is the man that was complained about child support, when he was paying me. So I thought to myself, okay, fine, don't take child support, but I'm always going to send my kids money if they need the money. And so he had the children, let's just say in the middle of December. I find out later, towards the end of December, from my grandmother telling me that my children are now staying with my mom in California, after the judge had told Wendell he was not allowed to cross state lines and take my kids anywhere, and the kids are to remain in his home. So after finding out that both of my sons were with my mom, I thought about it, and I thought, well, are they better off staying with my mom, or are they better off staying with Wendell? So I figured, well, you know what? I know without a doubt that if anything happens, my mom will call me and she will let me know what's going on with the kids. So I let them stay with my mother. They were there with my mom for a couple of months. And then finally, my oldest son moved out with his girlfriend. Giovanni ended up finding a little friend and then running away from the house because he was lonely and not having kids around his age. So then he moved in with his little friend and a principal, and everything was great. They're having a good time, and he was the only one that was able to really help her because she had a lot of mental issues. And then he had his own anxiety and things that I, found out about later on. And he was starting to self-medicate by trying to smoke marijuana and try to, help himself with his anxiety. And then the principal said to Wendell, hey, you know what, you need to take your son back because I can't be a principal. I can't condone him smoking marijuana. I can get in trouble as being a principal of a school. So, and in between that time, I think I jumped ahead of myself. Wendell had actually purchased an apartment and had the boys living there, unbeknownst to me. And I believe this was in, I think March of 2017, somewhere around there. So he had the boys in this apartment. He supposedly was checking in on them, but I never knew that my kids were going back and forth from him or my mom's.
Right.
So then later on, when the principal said, hey, you need to take your son back, Giovanni ends up moving back to Nevada in August of 2017. So at that time, Giovanni contacts me and says, hey, mom, I'm back. I'm living with dad. I wanted to see you. Sounded great to me. So I went to meet him. I had to be driven because at the time I had a broken ankle and couldn't drive, but I got to meet his friend, Jesse. And then that same day when we went to have lunch, that's when Giovanni came out to me and told me that he was gay. And I said, okay, that's wonderful. And then we started talking about something else. And then he says, no, mom, you didn't hear me. He says, I'm trying to tell you that I'm gay. And I said, yes, sweetheart, I heard what you said. I said, I think I knew before you knew. And I believe that he trusted me with giving me that, that information because he knew that I've always told him that I would love him no matter what. He could tell me anything about anything. So I know that he felt comfortable to come out to me, and I met the young man. Jesse was a really nice young man. And so later on, we went to his apartment. I walked around the place. I saw that the living room couch was kind of messed up with some blankets. And I said, how come it's like that? And Giovanni says, oh, well, that's where dad sleeps. So I thought, okay. And then he says, well, we're still waiting for a 2-bedroom. We're on a list, but we're trying to get a 2-bedroom so that we have more room. I walked around, walked to the kitchen, bedroom, everywhere, saw Wendell's clothes hanging and shoes and, toothbrush. So there was nothing for me to feel that my child was in danger and was not living with their father.
Right. They thought of everything.
Exactly. And I had even bought my son a bed because he had a flotation bed for him. I called Wendell up. I said, hey, what time are you coming home? I'm going to have the bed delivered. And he would tell me, hey, I'll be there by 5. No problem. So there was never a reason for me to doubt that my son was living with Wendell.
Who would imagine that their 14-year-old is living alone?
That's not something you ever think about.
No, I have a 14-year-old myself right now, and I cannot imagine. And it sounds like Giovanni liked living by himself.
Yes. And it's funny because the last contact I had with Giovanni, he kept telling me when we had gone to lunch, he says, Mom, I can hardly wait to be an adult because this is just taking too long. He says, I just want to hurry up and be an adult and start working and get on with my life. And that's just something that I thought that was kind of weird coming from him to say something like that.
Yeah, he was already rushing himself, and it wasn't even his fault.
Right.
He seems like such a good kid, too. Just everything I read about him, he just seemed like a sweetheart.
He was very, very loving. He is the type of kid that anytime there was a new child in school, they selected him as a little ambassador to have him take the child to meet all the different friends and all the different rooms and around campus. He was one that was always sticking up for people that were being bullied. And then one thing too is that I noticed that he was always protecting kids who would come out as being gay. And then the kids would make fun of those children. And he would protect them and stick up for them because he didn't want them getting hurt or bullied because they came out as being gay. And I believe that's probably the reason why he never wanted to come out, because he knew the cost. He knew what it would take and the repercussions of coming out.
Right. Yeah. He probably had seen it enough times and probably I would imagine that he heard enough from his father, just offhand comments here and there.
Yes, I truly believe that because I know that when I was married to his father, he would mix a lot of disparaging comments about gay people or transgender people or lesbians. He would just be very negative and say really bad, terrible things. So I can only imagine. I don't know if my son Giovanni came out to Wendell the same time he came out to me or before or a little later. I don't know the time period. So all I know is that kind of doing some of my own research and speaking to some of the kids that were friends with Giovanni, Wendell couldn't stand him being gay. So there was that precedence. He knew that my child was gay. He could not stand it. And then even the neighbors, would hear Wendell saying really terrible, disparaging comments about him being gay when they would have fights at the house.
That's awful.
Mm-hmm. And I can only imagine if he's overheard his father, like you said, saying something terrible about someone being gay, that would be a reason why he wouldn't say anything to his father. And the thing is this, when my son told me, that he was gay, my thought in my head was fear. That was the first thing that came to my heart, was fear, that I was always afraid that someone else would hurt my child. Someone else would judge my child. Even before they knew him, maybe seen him walk or talk or anything. That was my fear. And I told my son, I said, I accept you as who you are. I love you no matter what. But I also am going to tell you that it also worries me because there's a lot of people that are not open and not understanding like I am. And then you as a mother, you know that you can't control what happens when your child is away from you. And those are the things that you worry about because there's so many fanatics in this world.
Exactly.
I was looking through the computer and I was checking my son's grades, and I saw that in the morning he did not make it to his first 2 classes that he had missed. So that day is when I decided that I was going to go ahead, and that was the first day I had the car and I was able to drive because I had just gotten out of a cast with my ankle. And I was getting ready to come and pick up my son and take him to school. But something spiritually, something was telling me, no, wait, don't call. A few minutes later, I was going to call up Wendell and say, hey, did you take him to the doctors? Is that why he's not there? But the spirit said to me, no, hold on, wait. So there I am waiting, and I never listened to my inner voice. And that day I decided to listen. And so then maybe another 10, 15 minutes later, I get a knock at the door. I opened the door and it was a police officer and a lady. So I invited them in. I asked them to go ahead and have a seat. They said, no, ma'am, why don't you go ahead and have a seat first? So I thought that was odd. So I sat down and they asked me, do you have a son named Giovanni Melton? I said, yes. And then they asked me, is your ex-husband Wendell Melton? And I said, yes. So the first thing in my mind was, oh boy, I hope Giovanni didn't run away from home or get caught shoplifting or something, something like that. And that's when they told me that Wendell had gone to the apartment and that there was a loud argument and that all of a sudden there was a loud shot, a gunshot that went off, and that my son was shot by Wendell and that my son didn't make it. And I remember looking at them like, no, this isn't happening. That you got the wrong person. So I turned around and I was pointing at the wall behind me. I said, look, this is my son, Giovanni. That's him. You've got the wrong person. And they said, no, ma'am, we're really sorry to tell you, but that is your son. We did see your child, and that was your ex-husband, Wendell. And your son did not, live through it. And it took everything out of me. The first 5 months, I just did not want to live. And that day when this happened, I just fell to the ground. I just could not believe it. I was just crying and inconsolable. I just couldn't believe that. How could a man that you had your child with murder your child? That was so inconceivable to me. It's not something that you read about every day, but I just could not digest that. It was just too much. And I remember that as soon as the police left my home, there was the news media trying to get a hold of me, trying to call me and talk to me. But there was just no way that how could I talk to anyone after hearing such terrible news?
No, they're just vultures trying to get a hold of you that quickly. That's awful.
Mm-hmm. I just couldn't believe it. It's just horrifying. And so at the time I wasn't working because of my ankle being broken. And it was actually the community. I owe a lot to Senator Calvin Atkinson that reached out to me when they found out about the story, when it went, because, this story went viral. It went everywhere. And I don't know if I told you, but I have an uncle in England. He called up my grandmother that lives in California, in Montebello, California, and said that he had heard about my son being killed. My grandmother said, are you kidding me? What kind of nonsense are you hearing? No, nothing's happened over here to the family. He got a hold of her before I could even call my grandmother.
So it was very quick.
It went fast. It went everywhere. It was in Europe. It was in Africa. It was in Australia. It was in, obviously in England, in the United States. And there was a lot of different reactions from people on the internet. Some of them saying terrible things that's what my son deserved because, he should have never been gay. There's other people that were very upset that this happened, that wasn't a father. That was just a sperm donor. How could you kill your child? But it was like I was in this bubble where all of these things were going on. People were trying to get a hold of me. I was trying to call up my son, Marcelino, in California before he received the news. I was so worried that he would find out on the news before me telling him.
Of course.
And so luckily we were able to get a hold of him, and he just was very distraught because they were just, always together. They loved each other so much.
Yeah, there's so many pictures of the two of them together. They seemed so close.
Yeah.
I cannot imagine what he went through, let alone yourself. Yeah, I can imagine those first few months were pretty dark.
They were very dark. I mean, I'm not going to lie to you. I didn't want to live. The first 5 months I had to be really monitored because I just had lost the will. The only thing that I kept thinking about was my oldest son. I didn't want my oldest son to lose his brother, to have his father in jail, and then have his mother die of a broken heart. I thought that would be just too much for him, and I wouldn't want him to, internalize all of that and then try and do something to himself.
Yeah, that had to have taken tremendous strength.
I had always read about stories of parents losing their children, and I always thought, I don't understand how they could get through that. And then I find out for myself, the way that you get through that, and in my personal experience, was I had to live for my oldest son. That was the motivator. I had to live for my oldest son. I couldn't give up. And then at the same time, I couldn't let my ex-husband be the death of me, to kill both my son and also me because of a broken heart. I didn't want to go out like that. And then I felt, I know I'm not the only one. I know I'm not the only mother that has lost a child that was LGBTQ and survived. I knew there had to be other women and families that survived. So then that's when I thought, maybe when things get a little bit better and I can hold myself together, that maybe I can go ahead and maybe start a nonprofit that would be specifically for that. And so I did get the 501c3 as an educational nonprofit in August of 2019, but I could not actually go out, communicate, and do anything until approximately towards the end of 2021, because it was still too fresh for me.
And I'm sure it was a lot, with your other son. And does he live in California or is he in Nevada?
He lives in California. He did come out to the murder trial just to testify against his father, but he says that he never wants to live in Nevada because if he did, he wouldn't be able to get through it because he knows his father lives here. So it's still a big, huge impression to him knowing that his father is still alive. His father is in Nevada and he doesn't want to be anywhere near his father. And it's such a completely 160-degree turn compared to him idolizing and loving his father to a point now where he can't even be in the same room with his father or in the same state.
Yeah, and it took less than an instant for that change to happen. It's just so sudden and such a violent thing that he did.
Yeah, this maniac, this piece of crap, not only lied about how he went in there, because he went in the house with a gun and a satchel with bullets in it that he was carrying. He apparently got into the argument with my son. He said to the police that there was a scuffle and there was a big fight, although when the police came into the apartment afterwards, there was no sign of a struggle. There was even a cup on top of the table that wasn't even not even knocked over. Then he lied about how the gun got in there. He said that he kept the gun there underneath the couch, although the couch was those flat couches where you can't put anything underneath. And then they found blood from my poor son in a different part of the apartment. And then when the first responders came, Wendell pulled my son's body against the door so that the first responders couldn't even come into the door, come in to save him. He didn't want my son to live. And then when he had called 911, because they did talk about this during the closing arguments, even the dispatcher kept telling him, hey, if you're not going to help, do something, because he was more worried about his own tail than he was trying to give my son any type of resuscitation or first aid or anything like that.
And the tears that he cried during that call where he was supposedly inconsolable, it just sounds like it was for himself and the trouble he knew he was in.
It was for himself. It was for himself. He was never upset about my son. And after, too, they even showed an excerpt in the court where he was actually said, and he was talking about my son and calling my son the N-word. He says that N-word he shouldn't have been at the house. He was supposed to be at school. But that just goes to show how he had no feeling for my child. Who calls their child that? How do you say something like that? But you know what? It's those kind of people that are so narcissistic, that are so into themselves, they don't even realize what they're saying. They are saying the truth. He was saying the truth. He said exactly how he felt about my son. And I think that the jury saw all of that. The jury saw all of his lies that he said during his testimony. And then he tried to say that, that my son attacked him. Well, right after the supposedly attack and after he killed my son, they took pictures of his face, his neck. They had him lift his shirt. He showed his front of his chest, his back, not one scratch of supposedly this big fight that they had, because he claimed that he brought the gun to protect himself. He's 6'2", approximately 230 pounds. My son was maybe 125 pounds, soaking wet, and maybe about 5'6". But he was going there to protect himself.
With all of these extra bullets.
Exactly. So a revolver wasn't enough. 6 bullets wasn't enough, that you had to bring extra.
And the fact that he cocked the hammer just tells me everything. That's not an accident.
No.
It's almost like he didn't think about it ahead of time at all. He just acted, and it's ridiculous if it wasn't so tragic.
Exactly. But who goes to your child's house and brings a gun?
Yeah, and who lets your 14-year-old live on his own in the first place?
And that's what got me so upset about this, too, is that, at any time he could have picked up the phone and said, Veronica, pick up your son. I want nothing to do with him. That's all he had to do. Or call the police. Hey, I don't want this kid here anymore, or whatever the verbiage he wanted to use, and have, the police pick him up. But that's all he had to do.
Just the fact that he could have just reached out to you at any point.
At any point. Do you think that if I would have thought that my son's life was in jeopardy, I wouldn't pick up my son? I would have snatched him. He would have left his clothes there. I'd have snatched him, got him in the car, and took him out of there.
And you were living right nearby, weren't you?
Yes, we both live in the city of Henderson, and all this happened, and I had no clue that my son was living there. And in fact, I even asked Wendell one day, I said, are you living in that apartment? He says, of course I am. Okay. And because I thought, I had not been told that he had divorced his wife. And I even asked Giovanni, I said, is your father living here? I said, he says, of course, Mom. They're just having problems and stuff. So he's staying here. So if I ask both, they both tell me, of course.
Yeah, especially if his clothes are there and his shoes are there. It just, it's not something that would cross your mind.
Not at all. And what makes this so tragic is that, like you said, all he had to do is call me and say, I want nothing to do with Giovanni. Come pick him up. That's all it took. My son would be alive today. My son was only 14 years old when all of this happened. I mean, if you really look at it and from a time period, that means that the only accomplishment that my son had ever had was graduating from middle school. He had just graduated from middle school, and this was barely his 3rd month in high school. That's how young he was.
He was just a baby, just a freshman.
Yeah.
Did he graduate middle school in California?
I believe he did, because he had moved to California. So he had to have graduated from middle school in California and then moved out here with his father. But it's just disgusting. Like right now, I may sound really strong and talking about what has happened to my son, but I go through different phases. I go through phases where I have tremendous grief and I don't even want to get out of bed. I have other days where I feel strong that I can deal with this. I have other days where I'm very angry because of what has happened, and I want other children not to go through this and feel strong and have that power of anger to fight for children. Grief is like, I've been told, it's like waves. It comes and goes. You don't know what it's going to be like, when the day comes.
There can't be a way for you to feel better about this,
You're right, because people say, oh, well, time heals. Well, no, time doesn't heal, because the further and more time that we have is more time away from my child. When my child is supposed to be alive, when my child should have gotten his driver's license, when my child should have graduated from high school, when my child could have gotten married, when my child could have had children. That whole arm of my family tree is completely cut out. And there's nothing that I can do about it. And now, you can just imagine my worries now for my only child is that I, always think, I hope he's doing okay, because you never want to have anything happen to the other child.
One is far too much as it is. I'm so sorry you've had to deal with this. It's every mother's worst nightmare, of course, but it's made even worse by the fact that, number one, you're in the public eye because people are examining every detail about your life. And then the fact that it was your ex-husband that you never thought could do something like this. And it's just so many different facets.
Exactly. And then some people say, well, did you know that he would do that? No. How could I know that? He was always playing the Disneyland dad, or I'm the better parent. I spoil my kids. They get to get on the plane and go to California and visit family and do this and do that, or take them to Disneyland or something. But I never in a million years thought that he would ever hurt my child and kill my child. Had I even had an inkling, I would have never kept my children anywhere around him.
I know, and there's so many decisions that you second guess after the fact, and the public tends to do that too. I've seen it so many times, and I've gone to battle in so many comment sections over it, just people blaming the innocent family members after the fact, and, well, you did this or you should have done this. And it's so easy to make those decisions when it's not your situation and it's after the fact.
And that's very true. And I'm glad that you said that, because I even had people to try and take advantage of our tragedy and make money off of our family on GoFundMe. One lady said that she was my son's foster mother, and that my son suffered for many, many, many years, which was a lie, because Sandra Jones was my oldest son's girlfriend's mom that wanted to be in the limelight. And so when all of this tragedy hit, she was given an audio in front of, I guess, newscasters saying that she was the foster mother of Giovanni and Marcelino, and that was a lie. And she was collecting money from the GoFundMe, and then I found out about it, and I contacted the FBI. I'm assuming that they returned the money to the donors, but she was committing fraud by doing something like that. And there were people in New York that were also doing that, doing some type of pageantry, saying that they knew my son and that they were raising money for my son. And it's those people that come out that have no heart when something like this happens. And at the time, I wasn't working, and I was just barely getting better with my ankle. But the community came together. It was the LGBTQ community. It was the former Calvin Atkinson, that senator that contacted me. He contacted me through the coroner's office, and we went to his office. Then he took us over to a friend of his that is a director at the Serenity Funeral Home. They gave us a huge discount for getting all of the stuff that we needed for burial. They came up with about $25,000 that paid for the funeral, for the burial, for the marker, for the singers, for the rental of the churches, for the limousine service, for everything. I never came out of pocket, not one dime. And it was between the senators, the lobbyists, my church, the LDS church here in Nevada, and then private donors and friends that did that. So I feel in my heart that I can never repay the community the way they got together and lifted me from such a black hole that I thought I would never get out of.
That's really amazing. And it kind of gives you faith in humanity again, where some of the other events would absolutely make you lose it.
Exactly. And that's when I felt that there had to be more programs to help our youth. And that's when I made my decision that as soon as I felt a little bit better and stronger, that I wanted to be able to do that. that. And right now I'm working with two directors where they've already made their 4 films. And now that the murder trial is over, we are going to be able to do a documentary about what really happened to Giovanni, the real story, because there was so many lies that were told about the whole case. But we're going to be making a documentary about Giovanni. And then the 4 films that I have, I'm going to be raising money. We're having a charity event on October 21st to raise money to pay for all of that. I've got to try and raise $35,000 so that I can buy the rights to all of the 4 films and the documentary, so that once that's paid, I can start traveling and educating the community, parents, any place that works with children, so that they can understand what the struggles that the LGBT youth of color go through. And then also for me to be able to communicate and tell my story, that they don't want to be in my shoes. They don't ever want to go through what I went through.
No, I totally agree. You're doing amazing work, and I can't wait to see the documentary once it's finished. That'll be incredible.
Yes, I can hardly wait.
I'm honored to be able to help you tell Giovanni's story, and it deserves to be told. He deserves the truth to be out there, and so do you.
Yes, and I just want people to know that Giovanni was a very loving, very, very loving child, very charismatic. He was always smiling. He could come into a room and light up the room. He had a knack for doing impressions, and he would just listen to people and he would be able to mimic them. He was really good with karate. People thought that he had experience doing karate, and no, he was just very talented. Anything that he did, he was very talented when it came to, his body and being able to perform, and during school, and dances, and doing all kinds of things in his classes. And I know that my son would have really been something big in his life, whether he would have gotten into entertainment or if he would have gotten into, music. But I knew that my child was going to be something, really spectacular. But it was just, horrible that I never got a chance to really see his full potential in his life. And he is loved by his family. He has a lot of friends and teachers that adored him. With very little time that he was on this earth, he made a very, very big impression to a lot of people.
And his name and memory is going to carry on with you doing all of this amazing work in his name. So that is the best thing that I think you could be doing for him.
Thank you. I do appreciate that. I hope that this will be part of his legacy, and his legacy is what I'm working on, to be able to help other children so that something like this don't ever happen to another child. And I really appreciate you reaching out to me. It's an honor for me to be able to tell my son's story, because if I can change one person's heart from loving their child and not shunning them against them and trying to fix them when there's nothing wrong with their child is just different. If I can help one person to change that person's heart, then I've done my job.
I can't thank Veronica enough for coming on the show and telling us about her baby, not to mention all the amazing things she's done in Giovanni's name. I wish Veronica, Marcelino, and their family nothing but the best, and I hope you'll consider supporting the Giovanni Melton Foundation, which is doing incredibly important work for these kids and families who need help and support. That's it for this week. Join me next week for another episode. If you like the show, please follow or subscribe to Suffer the Little Children on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, Spreaker, Pandora, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, or your favorite podcast listening app. And please leave me a 5-star rating and a positive review on your favorite podcast platform. Visit the website at sufferthelittlechildrenpod.com, where you can listen to episodes or become a patron for rewards ranging from a shout-out by name on the show to bonus content and exclusive gifts. Follow the podcast on Facebook, Instagram, Tumblr, and Pinterest at Suffer the Little Children Pod, and on Twitter and TikTok at STLCpod. View photos related to today's episode on Facebook and Instagram. For more stories like the one you heard today, visit sufferthelittlechildrenblog.com. This podcast is researched, written, hosted, edited, and produced by Laine. All music for the show is licensed from audiojungle.net. Email tips, comments, questions, or case suggestions to sufferthelittlechildren.pod@gmail.com. For more information about preventing or reporting child abuse, visit childhelp.org or call your area's child abuse hotline. If you see something, say something. Until next week, bye everyone.